Every state has its own personality, but some are no doubt friendlier than others. Many people will point fingers at New York or Boston for being rude, fast-paced, and perpetually unhappy. And let's be real, if you endured the winters up there, you would be cranky too. On the contrary, the South has a reputation for its Southern charm and polite yes ma'ams. A native New Yorker once told me that New Yorkers are incredibly friendly and it's the Southerners that are less than hospitable with their fake politeness. Let me explain. A native New Yorker would argue that their fast-paced nature is about respecting other people's time, while the South is rude for talking to the cashier for half an hour about dill and sweet pickles despite having 30 people in line waiting to check out. This would never happen in New York. It's hard to quantify what it means to be unfriendly, as it's very subjective, so this video will use several markers to determine which states are least likely to welcome you with open arms, a glass of sweet tea, and a yes ma'am. This list will look at crime rates because, to be honest, it's hard to imagine the guy stealing your car is friendly. We'll also look at overall population loss, volunteerism, and tipping culture. And lastly, we will also look at anecdotal evidence from people who have been to all 50 states. Without further ado, the 10th least friendly state is Rhode Island. Most people won't be shocked that a New England state is on this list. With heavy traffic, harsh winters, and the nickname the Ocean State, despite not having a climate to enjoy the ocean, Rhode Island is one of the less friendly places to visit. Currently, the national average tip is 16.4% of the check, while Rhode Islanders leave 15.3%, and according to a recent survey, 42% of Rhode Islanders consider themselves to be ruder than other states. Rhode Island has a low crime rate, but it's hard to argue with a state that self-identifies as unfriendly. Number 9 on this list may surprise many viewers, since it's in the Sun Belt where people are generally pleasant. Alabama comes in at number 9. It has lower than average opportunities for volunteering and a higher than average crime rate. And they also have a lot of people screaming that annoying "Roll Tide" at every intersection. But not all is lost in Alabama. They saw a net increase in population and their crime rates, though high, have been steadily dropping. Additionally, Alabamans tip higher than the national average. So why did they make this list when they have also made the list as one of the friendlier states? The answer? It depends on who you ask. It's like what New Yorkers say. Alabamans take pride in their ability to insult you without insulting you. Ever heard of the phrase, "bless your heart"? Sounds friendly, right? Not in Alabama. Number 8 comes in at no surprise, even to New Yorkers. The only surprise is that it's not number 1 on this list. That state is New Jersey. Despite their reputation for bad driving, they are actually the 9th safest state to drive in. That aggressive road rage may seem unfriendly, but in reality, it's assertive driving. Shows like Jersey Shore and The Real Housewives of New Jersey do little to save its reputation as they perpetuate the stereotype of the loud, heavily accented, rough around the edges Jerseyans. Even fictional dramas like The Sopranos offer little redemption. On average, they tip less and volunteer less. Despite their rough reputation, New Jersey is actually one of the safest states to live in, with a crime rate significantly lower than the national average. Unlike Alabama, if they insult you, you'll know it. Number 7 doesn't veer too far from the last state, and no surprise that we land back in New England. Connecticut, one of the wealthiest states in the US, may seem like a friendly place to visit with its palatial mansions, yacht clubs, and generous coastline, but many viewers and locals describe an air of snobbiness that comes along with sprawling golf courses. Many people who move to Connecticut report feeling like noses were turned up at them from country club soccer moms. Despite the state's wealth, they tip lower than the national average, volunteer less than most, and have lost population in the last few years. What they lack in friendliness, they make up for in education, with one of the higher literacy rates in the nation. And who wouldn't want to strive for greatness when this state hosts the Ivy League school of Yale? Number 6 heads about as far away from Connecticut as possible. Alaska, the last frontier, has always been a place for hardy people to homestead. It's not for the faint of heart, and some of that grit and determination has not translated well into friendliness. Alaska is the biggest anomaly on this list. They tip higher than the national average, had slightly more people move in than out, and they have some of the highest volunteer opportunities per capita. Despite this, Alaska shows up on numerous unfriendly lists. Where Alaska fails most is in its high crime rate and climate. Alaska has one of the highest violent crime rates in the nation, much of which is against Native women that goes unreported. What makes Alaska most unfriendly can likely be attributed to its polar night and midnight sun. Studies show that living in the subarctic, where the sun is up for 20 or more hours in the summer and down for 20 or more hours in the winter, can disrupt circadian rhythms, contribute to depression and alcoholism, and thus create a feeling of unfriendliness. When it comes to being unfriendly, Alaska just looked at Rhode Island and said, "Hold my beer." We're just past the halfway point, and this list flies all over the map. There doesn't seem to be one region that corners the market on rudeness, despite the fact that most of the nation is giving the Northeast the side eye right now. Number 5 brings us to a state that straddles the Rust Belt. Almost heaven, West Virginia, to be exact. West Virginia does have high volunteerism within the state, has a crime rate slightly below the national average, and they tip higher than the national average. According to our criteria, you would think they would escape the wrath of this list. However, West Virginia's biggest shortcoming, which tends to overshadow its virtues, is that people simply don't want to live there. They lose a lot of people each year, largely due to lack of employment. This state falls at the economic opposite end of the spectrum than Connecticut, and both extremes seem to result in a lack of social graces. One West Virginian argues that the state's residents have a chip on their shoulder, constantly defending themselves against the nation's stereotypes. West Virginia is considered one of the most stereotyped states, from the notion that they are all hillbillies to cousins getting married. Wouldn't you be unfriendly to an outsider if you were constantly debunking the unfriendliness of others? One region that is never accused of being unfriendly is the Midwest, which makes the fact that Michigan is on this list a real head-turner. One can point fingers at Detroit and blame all the state's problems on its decline, but the state itself falls short of many criteria. They have some of the lowest volunteerism and are the 10th most dangerous state. They tip on par with the national average and gained ever so slightly in population, so it's not a total loss. Michiganders make the same argument as the Northeast, claiming that they are not rude or unfriendly, they are just straight shooters. And who wouldn't want an honest friend? Maybe Michiganders have a point. However, studies show that Michiganders are some of the loneliest and have experienced urban blight more than any other state. We can't fault them for having a hostile attitude after events like the water pollution in Flint. Studies show that 25% of the population suffers from PTSD. So while they may not be the friendliest, at least they have an excuse. What is New York's excuse? Speaking of New York, I don't know what's more shocking, that it took this long to bring it up, or that it's only third on the list? They drive like maniacs, tip significantly lower than the national average, can barely maintain their population, and whether they are straight shooters like Michigan or just flat out rude, New York is the #1 guest state when it comes to being unfriendly. Studies show that their accents may have something to do with their perception. New Yorkers, however, pride themselves on how friendly they are. If anyone stares at a subway map for more than 3 seconds, they will be bombarded by locals asking if they need help. New Yorkers take pride in their uncanny ability to navigate the labyrinth of subways from memory and on command. Ever try to order a bagel at a deli during the breakfast rush? If it takes you longer than 2.5 seconds to place an order, the deli clerk and line behind you will jump down your throat and push past you until you make up your mind. The clerk won't chat with you about your day or inquire about your favorite flavors of cream cheese. While you may see this as unfriendly, the savvy New Yorker would argue the opposite. It is friendly of them to rush you in order to be considerate of the 30 people behind you that are in a hurry to get to work. What do you think about New York? Tell us in the comments below. Talk about a hold my beer situation. The following 2 states have been deemed less friendly than New York. Digest that for a moment. 2 states are less friendly than New York. The first state to pass its beer over to New York is Arkansas. Arkansas has secured its spot as the 2nd least friendly state in the US. They tip on par with the national average and have gained some population over the years. However, they don't volunteer as much as many other states, and their crime rate is significantly higher than the national average. Most people would use the crime statistic alone. Arkansas is isolated by many natural barriers, from the Mississippi River to the Ozark Mountains. It was a haven for criminals hiding out in Indian territories, and ultimately the state has evolved into a series of enclaves of local and folk culture. Perhaps Arkansas isn't so much unfriendly as it is insular, which can read as unfriendly to an outsider. Like West Virginia, Arkansas has been plagued with banjo-strumming hillbilly stereotypes, and that constant suspicion of outsiders has earned its place as number 2. Forget holding that beer. Our next state just said, "Hold my Chimayo cocktail." That's right, New Mexico takes the prize as being America's least friendly state. They are average tippers and maintain a relatively stable population. Unfortunately, they have the second highest crime rate, have low volunteerism, and have the biggest gap between rich and poor. There's also a huge disparity between poverty rates among native peoples and the rest of the state. Perhaps their unfriendliness is a response to their fight for equality. Or maybe it's something unworldly? Roswell, New Mexico is, after all, a beacon for UFO hunters and conspiracy lovers. Perhaps their unfriendliness is a lingering effect of a nuclear bomb. The first nuclear bomb ever dropped on Earth happened in New Mexico on July 6, 1945, as a test run during World War II. The explosion could be seen as far as 200 miles away. Who would be friendly after that? Of course, there are friendly people in New Mexico, and one only needs to look at its natural beauty to see why its people have reason to smile. Check out our video on the best places in New Mexico for more things to learn about New Mexico. We finished the list, but here's a bonus fact. A study showed that accents alone play a huge role in whether a person is perceived as rude, intelligent, honest, and even nice. 51% of those polled said New Yorkers are rude, while only 7% viewed them as nice. Those same polls show that the New York accent is the second most hated accent, losing to the South. So are these southern and northeastern states getting a bad rap just because of their accents? And are Midwesterners actually just a bunch of unfriendly people hiding behind a friendly accent? You decide in the comments below.